Deborah Jack is a St. Martin and New Jersey City-based multidisciplinary artist whose work is based in sound and video installation, photography, painting, and text. Her work engages a variety of strategies for mining the intersections of histories, cultural memory, ecology, and climate change. Her current practice connects the effects of the hurricane storm surge in relation to coastal erosion, the saltwater inundation of intertidal spaces. She imagines these rhizomatic, protective intersectional landscapes and wetlands as sites of resistance. This altered landscape, post-surge, though temporal, is an exciting conceptual space regarding the intangible memory of water as it intersects with the land and the people who live there. Deborah has exhibited nationally and internationally. She has also participated in countless distinguished residencies and fellowships and is currently a professor of art in Northern New Jersey. Deborah recently presented her new body of work in a solo exhibition entitled Intertidal Imaginaries, the Resistant Geographies of the Shore in Aftermath of Saltwater Surges at the Houston Center for Photography.
This is The Hidden Critique, where we discuss art, race, and higher education at the intersection of an MFA. I'm Marlon Tobias, pronouns he, him.
And I'm Krystle Lemonias, pronouns she, her.
Welcome to our show.
Welcome, Deborah Jack. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
I'm excited to be here. This is cool.
Yay.
Yes.
I've been looking forward to this.
Aww.
We're excited. All right. But before we get started, because mental health is important in life, especially when you're living the artist entrepreneurial lifestyle, Deborah, how's your heart?
That's a good question. It's good. I think it's good. It's a little, the state of the world is making it a little sadder. I think just because, maybe if you have a heart, I tend to empathize with too many things. It feels like it's on a constant sort of sadness, but I do try to protect it. So I think it is good. I try to ground myself every now and again and find moments of joy. But, it's beating, but it's mm-hmm. I can't lie and say it's not a struggle these days.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Chris, how's your heart?
It is feeling exhausted, but grateful. I'm coming off a busy week, productive week, but, trying to make the best of it also given the state of the world. So happy for the space that I have in my control, but, grieving the future that we are trying to build, that we are a few steps back from where we would like to be. So yes, I think that's where my heart is right now, figuring out what are the next steps. How is your heart though, Marlon?
My heart is pretty okay.
It's okay.
It's pretty okay. I'm in a stable place,
You sounded almost numb.
In some ways, yes. I'm not gonna lie. I am pretty tired, but I am also not in a space where I'm not letting I don't want to let my emotions fuel or dictate my progression. Right.
Okay.
So I'm trying really hard to stay optimistic, and even though it's taking a little bit more labor these days, but something that I try to say to myself daily is that I'm here for a reason. So regardless of how I'm feeling, there's a higher purpose of work for me to do. So I'm focusing on that. Pushing forward.
All right. Sounds good. Well, let us get into the conversation with Professor Deborah Jack here. Why I'm so ecstatic for you to be on the show today is because when I was in undergrad in New Jersey, I didn't get to work with you, but I knew you on the peripherals, knowing that you were this really firm faculty member that was challenging students, but maybe they were saying that you're giving them a hard time, so on and so forth. And then my interaction with you was thesis, when you told me to go back to scratch and do it again. And though I was upset, I said, okay, maybe this is a good thing. Okay, so I listened, and I am very grateful now that I did listen. It was tasteful now looking back as to why I needed to find more ways to grow. And so that was my first experience with you. And now I'm like, oh yeah, that's like really some Jamaica or Caribbean hard love. And I appreciate you for all of that. And yes, that is my little backstory with you that I want to share to the people. But could you share with us some of your formal education experience and how you may have got some hard love in the past?
I love that. Hard love. We need more of that. We need more of that.
Yes, that's a very, I don't know, it's very Caribbean immigrant, I think, kind of, parent-elder behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess, yeah, and in the moment that you're getting it is hard. You find a love path later. You come to the love after the hard part. But
True.
I guess for me, like I was the kind of student who challenged myself a lot. I think I was kind of like suspicious of like compliments. I actually had a professor when I was in undergrad. I did TV production and I had to edit a project. I did this project and it came out good. And every time the professor would say something nice, I would say, yes, but 2 minutes in, this happened. And, if you look at this, you could hear this glitch, and I would point out all the mistakes I made. And this went on for most of the semester. And then I did something else again, and he was giving me a compliment and somebody else was, and I started up and he held up his hand and he said, if there's one thing you take away from me, from our whole experience together, he said, yes. He's like, I want you to hear a compliment, say thank you, and walk away. Right? Because I would turn around and like point out all the things or reasons why you shouldn't be thanking me, right? And so I think it was the first time he sort of recognized that I had trouble with praise, which sometimes is also like, until then, no one had ever said anything like that to me or even pointed it out or given me a strategy, actually, So, for what to do, say thank you and then sort of graciously leave the conversation. Because he knew if I stayed, I'd want to like confess what was wrong. And then another one that stayed with me was in grad school. And I'd come into grad school and I had, I ran into one of the head of the photo department, really, of the grad photo department. And I saw him in the hallway and I was all excited. It was our first week. And I was like, hi, I'm Deborah, so glad to be here. And he goes, because they see your name. They don't see your picture or anything like that. So I saw him, I knew who he was, and I went up to introduce myself. And he was like, Deborah. I said, yeah. He said, yes. He said, you. He said, yeah, you wrote a really strong statement, with your work. And I was like, oh, thank you. And then he goes like, yeah, if only your work looked as good as how you write about it.
Dang!
And I remember.
Wow. Shots fired. On the first day. Like that I met him, and I was just like, oh, okay,
Wow.
And but you know what though, I he became the person who then throughout my whole graduate career, I felt like anytime we showed work, I would look at him, or look at his face. He was an African-American man. He had this like white afro, white hair. And he would always, look at your work kind of skeptically. And, I'd be talking about, what it is I'm doing. And he'd just be like, I don't see it, or point out things that, that he thought were lacking. And I was just like, I thought it was on the right track. Okay. And then the other faculty would be a little bit more supportive, even if they had critique. The photo department had a reputation of having like a really actually strong critique. And so, but I would hear theirs, but I would always, sort of like look at him. And it really was the last presentation before the thesis exhibition. We sort of had to show our work, what we were planning to show. And talk about it. And I gave this whole presentation. I showed the videos, and I just looked at him, at the end, and he just nodded. All he did was just nodded. And that nod felt like, like a child. That was the greatest affirmation ever. I didn't care who applauded. Like, to me, it was just like the skies opened, right? And I was like, yes, finally.
So tell me,
he was finally impressed. So yeah.
How are you able, or at least at that point in time, how were you able to discern what was critique that was really understanding of the perspective and what you were trying to build, and critique that kind of was in some ways not quite getting the foundation of what you're coming from, and it not fully have the context to really give you information to build?
I think when receiving, like when you hear critique, I think and it's tricky, right? I think it's partly yourself. I think you have to check your ego when you're making work. And of course, you're emotionally attached to it. You really put in time and effort, right? And so in a way, you have to get past that first initial response, which is to say, yeah, no, but you're not seeing it, right? And then go like, why are they not seeing it? Like, what is, communication is sender, message, receiver. So what's happening with the communication that the person isn't receiving this, right? And so, and that means that you have to go back and examine the message, right? Is it too complicated? Is it too simple? Is there not enough depth? Are there not enough layers? And be willing to ask yourself those kinds of hard questions. I think good critique also says a little bit why, they give some perspective as to why are they coming to you with this position, as opposed to just being like, negative or something. I think too, a lot of times, especially when you're making work that comes from sort of like, they're bringing perspectives that are not part of the larger narrative and that everybody doesn't understand. I think it is also a little bit on you to also be educated in those perspectives, because a lot of times people are not.
Yeah.
And so I learned in graduate school, actually from one faculty member who's Native American, and she knew everybody's history. I would listen to her critique and give feedback, and then give feedback on other faculty's feedback, right? And when people would say something and she'd be like, yeah, but are you coming from this from like a white male Western perspective? Right? Because, if you come from this, she could quote like Lacan and Hegel and all these like white theorists, right? And then break it down and to show why that was nonsense. And if from that perspective, it was limiting. And then bring in perspective as well. And it taught me that, okay, you sort of have to be able to, you have to be kind of like multilingual.
Yes.
When making your work. I don't think only we need to be multilingual. I think everybody needs to sort of have exposure, right? A lot of times it falls to us. If you're coming from kind of like, I don't like to say marginalized space, because I've never thought of myself as a margin, but or being in a margin, right? Because it's all perspective. I grew up in the Caribbean.
Yes.
I had Black people around me who were in leadership positions, and so nobody there was a marginalized person. So that's language I pick up here. But I think it does behoove you to know that. So that means that when you're getting critique and you're getting this kind of feedback, one, you can identify whether somebody is understanding your position. Two, you also can see if your position can speak to multiple people.
Yes.
Right? Like, can people enter your work? Is your work so dense and so tight that like nobody gets what you're talking about unless they went through your particular experience? That too is limiting, And so I always ask myself those things, if people are giving me feedback. And also too, like, are they raising good points? I mean, I have friends who are tough on me, and sometimes you show like all this work and this stuff that you really love, and then they're like, and it's like, wait, what do you mean? Like, this is the good one. Like, this is the best one for the project, because I worked extra hard. I really had to resolve this one particular thing. If you only knew what went into this particular work. And I have good friends who are artists who critique my work for me. And then you have to realize, like, there's this term called a little darling. Like, and I edit video. I started there. Right? And so with your little darlings are your things that you really love and maybe don't benefit the story. It could be an awesome shot. Like maybe you had to climb up a tree and hang out, from a branch, and you tromp through the swamp to get this particular shot, and it's awesome. But within the larger narrative of the piece, it just doesn't work. But you stick it in because you work for this. You climbed the mountain to get this shot.
Mm-hmm.
Is the shot any good? Yes, it's a good shot, but is it just a little darling? You just love it for loving it, but does it still have the whole work, the body of work?
Yeah.
And so I think coming from editing to also made me learn to just like step back and look at it and be like, are they right? like, is this here just because I love it? Or is it still in the larger work? So it's like, but it takes training. You have to grow into it, I think, hearing critique, but you have to understand a critique's not personal.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first step is to be like, don't take it personally. If you ask for feedback, especially, that means that there's something that you recognize from a person that you want to get critique from. And it also could be like, just don't ask everybody for feedback. Sometimes we ask people to critique our work who maybe shouldn't be critiquing our work. You just can't ask everybody.
Yeah.
Don't just ask everybody. Ask somebody who you might already have known or researched or seen if they like have, something, whether it's technique, whether it's approach to work, whether it's working with a particular medium. So ask everybody. That's something we do a lot too. We just think, oh, this person, let me get their feedback. And, sometimes we have to like not do that either, which of course is not always possible in school, but, understanding those things too, I think just helps.
What do you think was your major takeaway from your MFA program that established your career?
I mean, I really went to a wonderful program. I know people have like some nightmare scenarios in the MFA. Yeah. It was tough, but it was tough love. And so I think what I took away from there was having a kind of intellectual rigor to go with the visual. The program, I didn't know when I went, but it was known as sort of having a strong conceptual program. And so from that, I take away, like, what is the work saying? Like, what is this about? Like, how can you articulate what your work is about? And that for me was something, because I went to school in a place that was so different from where I came from. I came from the Caribbean, and that school was, on the border with Canada, in Buffalo. You can't get more farther away from the tropics than that in the US, right? And so being in a strange place, like climate-wise, geographically, culturally, and then being in that community that was very supportive and also really expansive at the same time, it introduced me to video as art. Up until then, I used it as documentary or news, or like narrative, but not as art. And Buffalo had a very strong history of experimental video, film, and music. And so, just being the experimentation and kind of being flexible, but also being able to articulate your position in terms of your work. What are you trying to say?
Okay.
Nice. And I think this is a good way to also kind of segue into your studio practice. So what are you currently working on?
Well, I just finished a 6-channel video installation. So right now I'm falling asleep. Right now I'm working.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that was a challenging work. And at the same time, I'm also working on a project that came from my Soros Art Fellowship that I won in 2003. And so it was a hybrid. I don't know how to label it just yet, but it's a work where I'm interviewing elders in my country about their memory of the land and the landscape that they grew up with and how that's changed. And it's called like To Make a Map of My Memory. And so to think about topography and map making in a way that not necessarily counters the archive, the archive of the colonizer, but at least can live alongside of it. And that is given the same intellectual value right? And so I'm interested in saving their memory of how the land looked and how they interacted with it. And then documenting those spaces and also going into the archive. I've been to this summer, I went to the archive in the Netherlands for film and sound, and then also just like for images. Because that's the thing in St. Martin archive, especially from the early 20th century, late 19th centuries, all in the Netherlands. And so, how do you access that is part of the work in going in and finding images of some of those places that they're talking about, and then coming up with a multimedia project that incorporates the interviews, but also with images, and then images that I shoot of the land as it is now. And so, but a key part of that is also that these interviews, the totality of them, because as I edit for the work, it'll look different, and I'll use certain clips. But I'm also interested in then creating an archive of those interviews as well. And part of the project is to give back. And so the third part is to have workshops where people learn to interview their family members and create like this sort of oral history of the island. And then they can ask their questions about anything. But mine is specifically to the land. We have projects that are, preserving recipes and cultural dress and all those things. But mine is really about how the land has changed either through natural disaster, storms, or development. And even though there's a lot of development, I'm trying to stay away from the development because it's really kind of like the natural world, but the development has done so much ecological damage that I can't avoid it either. So
wow, I would love to be a part of that workshop.
That project's been great. And I'm taking a little breather and then getting back to it. Then figuring out what I want to do with that.
Okay.
That's what I'm working on now.
Wonderful.
Nice. And your studio, is it in-house or is it away from do you have like a separation between your studio and your
I need more separation.
Yeah.
But I do have a studio space. I have a studio space that's only 2 years old. I mean, I do like to encourage younger artists because I was a single mom as an artist. And for a long time, my studio was my living room. And I just made it work in that space. So I got the studio when my daughter graduated from college.
Hey.
Oh, wow.
Isn't it a little more? So, I say this to sort of encourage people who feel like you need to have this space away. And I was able to work for 20 years without a studio and making time for myself to do the work. But now I have the studio, but if you knew me, I would leave the studio at midnight and then I go sit at home on the computer for another hour. And then sometimes I leave my laptop in the studio to make myself not work when I get home. But my studio space is where I do some of my 3D and 2D type work, the collages and have the photos up and plan stuff. But the editing is on my computer and that I sort of can take everywhere. So I have both. If I'm honest, I would say I have two studios. The one at home still exists.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Fantastic. Could you share a bit about how you found your unique voice in video? Many people have access to a camera and, materials to make video.
Yeah.
You've built such a unique approach to your making. How did you develop that?
It's a very loose approach. I think, and it's sort of breaking rules, right? So I use a lot of movements. I don't really use a tripod that much. Sometimes I regret it. Sometimes I don't. But my very early videos, I knew I wanted to do abstraction. I would go like in St. Martin, I would go up to a tree and then just sort of, you had the smaller cameras. And so if you do like video production, especially like professional, you have these giant cameras and then a giant recording pack that you'd have to hold and move. And so when smaller mini DV cameras came about, it allowed for flexibility, even more flexibility, because there was a time that pack was also considered flexible. But being able to sort of have a camera that fit in your hand allowed me to sort of like move it. And so I was able to sort of move along the surface of things and get textures and create a kind of movement. And so having the sort of relationship with my body, that the limits of the camera were all within the limits of my body in terms of the movement, which I think for me, I guess creates a certain kind of I wasn't using booms. I wasn't using anything that extended beyond what I could do physically.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of helped to form a kind of practice with the video that was very personal.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't require a crew, honestly, because when I first started, when I didn't have one, and then I also couldn't afford one.
Yeah.
So I sort of worked with what I had, and so a mini DV camera, those recorders could literally fit like in the palm of your hand. They had a strap you could put your hand through, and that allowed me to sort of create a kind of visual for what I wanted. And also my interest in science. So I would look at satellite images. So that's where like images of satellite imagery of hurricanes, and it was something that was part of my visual language. Also, because coming from St. Martin, you looked at hurricanes, right? You looked at the weather, you looked at maps, you read maps. And so being able to see satellite imagery of the weather always was something that I sort of took for granted. But when I started thinking about my work and really using hurricanes as part of like the concept of my work, it felt very natural to sort of use this kind of satellite footage that was available, because there was an inherent beauty, I thought, in that sort of perspective of a hurricane while the devastation on the ground was real. And then now I think that now people associate these sort of blocks in the video. And it's these sort of geometric shapes that move throughout the plane of the video.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was funny. It was actually when I had the retrospective exhibition at Pen and Brush in New York. And they sort of having a mini retrospective like that forces you to sort of think about like your trajectory, right? And I tell somebody, it's like I literally just had my head down and I'm just like moving. You don't look back. You're not looking around. You just sort of like swimming ahead. So until then, I didn't have to really stop and think. And there's a painting that is in the show. And this painting was literally always been next to my workstation on the wall. And it's an abstract painting that has like this grid that's made out of salt, because I was using sort of like already this grid, and the rectangle shape was made out of salt on the painting. And I looked at the pen and it dawned on me, I said, oh my God, all my work is like, had this grid in it. And this painting was from like 2000, like 1999,
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, there's always some variation of this painting, right? This block, this geometric shapes that are referencing. And at the time, it was referencing the aerial view of the salt pond. And in the salt pond would have these divisions, these grids for like where you would work and who was allowed to work in certain sections and how to harvest the salt. So I grew up already just on the island having this sort of visual of this grid on a pond, on this body of water, this very, geometric shape on an organic shape. And so that, I guess, is just sort of like one of the things that moved its way into the newer video works. I think for the first time I did it. In 2017, I had a piece where I divided the screen into 3 sections, one screen, and I kind of liked the multiplicity of that. And then I started bringing the shape in. And that was also just me trying to think, like, how can I make video like a painting? Like, I love abstract paintings. My abstract paintings have these squares and rectangles in them. Like, how do we create space in a video? Can a video be like a painting? Can you play with line? These were all these sort of questions I was having about work and visual art and video in general. And that sort of answering those questions then is how I think that developed into the work. I mean, for me, a lot of times the work is I have a question that I want to answer, or I have something that interests me that I want to figure out. And so the art is how I figure it out. It starts out with Post-it notes all on the wall, like a crazy person. And then with like connections and quotes and images, I see it's just a sort of like, and then I start thinking about those questions as I, work with images. But a lot of it is play, like coming up with that grid and having those shapes move is all me playing with the video and thinking of it like a material and not thinking about, playing around with it the same way somebody would push paint around or mix colors or add a texture to a color. I wanted to apply that to video as well.
Wow.
That's how.
And I'm just curious because there's a lot of work that's going into your practice. And I'm just curious, what else are you downloading while you work? Like, are you listening to audiobooks? Is there particular music that you're listening
Yeah, I
to
can't do
that
audiobooks. I have friends
no?
who I have friends who do audiobooks while I'm and I'm like, how are you how is this person talking to you while you're also so no, but I do listen to music, but my music tastes are like I can't even give you a category other than just good music. Um, but I do listen to music when I work. Usually it's rock.
Rock.
Yeah, I'm a big rock fan. But it also just depends on my mood. Like sometimes I know if I listen to certain music, it won't move the work forward because I'll be too busy like listening to
Jamming.
it. Yeah. And so sometimes I do listen to, I came from a musical household. I'll say that first. With
Okay.
multiple tastes. And I also grew up in an era where, you still had DJs. And I still marvel about the fact that when I go and visit my mom in St. Martin, and I'll sit in the morning in the kitchen with her and, in 15 minutes, I'll hear like 4 different genres of music.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hear some American R&B. I'll hear French. I'll hear some zouk.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hear a salsa song. There'll be a reggae song.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, and I'll sit there and go like, never in America would I put on the radio and hear like all these different types of music.
Wow.
Right. Just sitting like in 15 minutes, And so
That's amazing.
but I grew up with that. And I think, that's part of the thing now, right? Like Spotify and these things these streaming things give you what you like. They figure out what you like, and then they give you the same type of music over and over and over to the point that I feel like I stopped listening to music the last month because I got annoyed because the playlist started to lack variety. But yeah, I listen to music. I listen to, I like science podcasts, but it's not while I'm making work.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? Like I make a lot of work in my head too. I don't know how to explain it. Like my mind races. So I'm always thinking about something. I'm always thinking about black holes, an event horizon, which is the edge of a black hole, and how something can exist there, right? Because when the forces there will pull it apart, but it's still a place. So it's a place where things can't really exist. And so, yeah, like that's what I'm always musing.
And so tell me, so you're making so much of this work and utilizing research from various scientists as well as your writing and all that you're taking in imagery and sound. What does your community look like? What do you ask from your community as you're working and as you're making?
Maybe I'm a little controversial in this, but I I have a community of friends and artists, but I'm a loner. I am a loner and an introvert. But I'm one of those introvert, extrovert people. Someone sent me a thing and it's like, oh, that's me. I can be out in the world, but I do reach a point where I do have to recharge. And that usually takes the form of me retreating to my own space. And I've always been like this. Before I knew the names for it, when I was a kid, I would come home from school and I'd just go in my room, and in the Caribbean, you have to go greet everybody. And my mom used to let me do that though. She wouldn't make me come and say anything. She would let me go in my room and she knew that 15, 20 minutes later I would come out and I would be fine. But on some level, she knew that I needed to just be quiet because school was so like loud in a sense to me. And I still have that. Like, sometimes I sit with my headphones on and there's no music. So, my community is a group of friends who are artists. I have a couple. Literally 2 that I bug, like that I'll call up at 1 a.m. and be like, hey, I think black holes in the eyes of hurricanes are like portals.
Well, yeah, I'll have some other people for be able to take a little bit of your madness. All right, so you go about all up in
Yes, right. So, but they don't necessarily think similar thoughts, but they don't ever judge me for having mine. And they indulge my rantings about it. And they'll go like, oh, okay. All right, you'll work it out, and because sometimes I just need to say it out loud, or to bounce the questions off somebody else. And sometimes, like they don't answer what I want to hear, or they don't know, but sometimes me being able to articulate it out loud to not just myself, because that, because I do that too. It also helps me form a point of view or perspective, right? Like having to formulate the question, right? Because you can't get an answer unless you know what the question is. You get the wrong answer if you ask the wrong question, kind of thing. And so I do use that community. I know like artists, but when, say for instance, like this last piece that I just did for Prospect, which is a 6-channel video. Like to me, this was one of the hardest pieces to make because there was so many people, I think, engaged in it. Like it was the first time I worked with drone camera people. I worked with them as they flew the drones and directed images, but like I wasn't in control of the camera. And then also the sound, like I didn't make the sound, but like it was commissioned with composers and we, that discussed what I wanted and I showed them clips and we went back and forth to create the sound, but like somebody else did it. And then also like lots of interviews with scientists. A couple scientists took me around in New Orleans and that was great because I came in with an idea of the kind of piece I wanted to make. And then those conversations, even though I know I'm not a scientist and like half the time I don't know the right terms and I apologize always up front, but like it's those conversations and they like, it's good to have a scientist who likes that, who's fine with that. Right. And your questions and like no question is too dumb, but then their answers also then illuminate the piece. So my purpose is never to make some sort of scientific thing, right? Like if you listen to the video and you don't know the Rosby whistle, I'd like to think that it does affect you in a way, maybe just as a sound piece, right? If you don't realize that I Have a Hurricane is, like the satellite footage of that, like it's just hard now. But, like if you're not understanding the science of it, that's fine. But the scientists I worked with, for instance, we had these discussions about water and land loss and my work is looking at coastal erosion and, but he was, at one point he goes, well, there's a couple places in the Mississippi where they left it alone and it's actually land was built. And I was like, wait, what? And so, and then, him showing me a place called Neptune Pass and how the largest delta is being formed is not stuff that you can necessarily read about because it's still kind of new. And so my piece is looking at that space. I'm not having like a deep geological conversation, but I am thinking about waterways and edges and how water changes and the impacts of the environment and climate change, so it's a lot of times I think artists or people who create like close themselves off from information or look at only other artists. And I look at a lot of other stuff other than art to influence my work. Absolutely. There's a poem, there's a text that's in the work and it talks about horizons of soil. And I found that because I was looking for I said, I know about layers of water. I said, what are the layers of soil called? And then that's how I found out that the scientific term for like each layer of soil is a horizon. And I was like, well, that's so poetic, right? A scientist is not thinking about the poetry of the term at all. I hear that and I go like, ooh, so I'm always interested in like, what is the poetic thing here in this scientific space? So yeah, so that, those are my influences. I'm just like insanely curious person. I just always want to sort of like learn new things or look at things and I ask questions. I grew up in an age of the encyclopedia book. In those books, when you were looking for something, you have to turn the pages and you were learning a lot about other things on the way to the thing that you were looking at, right? Looking for. Now you can just go directly and search for the thing itself. So there's no accidental information that you're learning. There's no serendipity about some of the stuff that you find out. And everything is just your searches are very specific. And so because I come from that kind of like thing where on the way to looking up igloo, you find out about Iceland, Yeah. And so that kind of thing.
So tell me the last question I have for you, the hierarchy of the things that we need to make. What are you doing that is not paid labor and only for your creative nourishment?
We laughed about this the last time. Yeah.
we did. We didn't formally bust out in laugh, but have you thought of it since then? Is there something that you actually...
I'm trying to see if it was written down. So what is it that I do that is not paid labor for creative nourishment? I guess I go to the movies.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
What's the last movie you saw?
I haven't gone to a movie since March.
Oh.
No, that means you do for a break, man. You do bad for a break.
I am due. I am going to see some. I even I have to say my brother is my savior in this. Like when I go to visit him, is it one of the few times you'll find me on a couch binge watching something because usually I'm in the corner working.
Yeah, but, yeah.
There comes a point where I do get to pick. But I like going to the movies was kind of like, I must say, the thing I used to do. Yeah. To just, for fun.
Yeah.
Fun, which,
that's fantastic.
Especially superhero movies.
Oh, I didn't envision you were a super movie.
Oh, well, I say fan loosely because so many of them are disappointing. As someone who's read the books, I told people I started reading comic books like in the late 70s, right? So these, especially the X-Men, a friend jokes at me because I call them by their names. I talk about Logan, Scott, and Jean. And she's like, who are these? And I was like, oh, Wolverine. She's like, you call them by the human name. And I was like, they're like family.
I love the world that you're living in.
I call Wolverine Wolvie, but that's me. That's my I do call him Wolverine.
Not a pet name.
I do, because he's like my favorite of all. Like him and Cable, but you have to be a geek to know Cable. I don't think, he's, look up Cable.
I will. I literally have a list of resources. I'm going to put Cable in there.
Anyway, he's extended X-Men family. But that was the one.
Extended.
It's extended X-Men. He's from the future and then comes back. But don't get me started.
No. That's a whole nother thing.
That's a whole other episode.
My black geekness is
yes. Love a good blurred. Love a good blurred. Yes.
Blurred forever.
Yes.
It's so good that there's a name for it now. It was frowned upon once upon a time, but yeah.
Well, Deborah,
and then Rogue One. I watch episodes of Rogue One for fun. That's how I unwind. I've seen it 10,000 times probably now. But Star Wars Rogue One, which is not uplifting necessarily, but I love that film. So I just put it on sometimes and I just want to unwind. It's not unpaid labor.
I love that. Deborah, thank you so much for talking with us and also just giving us some great jewels and nuggets to take away, especially as we and as emerging artists are working to establish themselves and get to the next level. And also giving us a view of what it really looks like to put in the work. Because from talking with you, you are a true definition of really putting in that work and showing the fruits of that labor as well. So thank you very much. But before we let you go, we want to give you a shameless plug. How can we follow you? What's next for you? And all those good things to keep up with you.
Okay, well, right now, if you're in the New Orleans area or plan to be in New Orleans between now and February 2nd, I have work up. I have a 6-channel installation that's up as part of Prospect 6, the triennial there. January 31st, I'm actually going to be doing a performance with a group that did the score for it. So it'll be like a kind of a concert with those musicians. And I'll be in the Havana Biennial as well. And that started like November 15th to February, I want to say 15th as well. So that's what's going on. That's what's coming up. And you guys can follow me on DebJack0 on Instagram. And my website is literally my name.com, DeborahJack.com.
Fantastic.
Now we're at the point of the show where we want to hear from you, the listener. Join us on Instagram and Patreon to share your thoughts on these 2 questions. 1. Given the demand that artists have today, how do you pace yourself to sustain your art practice? And 2, how are you measuring growth within your art practice?
Thank you for listening to our episode. The Hidden Critique is produced and hosted by us, Krystle and Lemonias and Marlon Tobias. Episodes are edited by Kirsten Pettifor. Original music composed by Cesar Presa.
If you like the show, you can review and rate this podcast via Spotify. You can also like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube page.
For exclusive bonus content, subscribe to our Patreon at The Hidden Critique.